Welcome back, everyone. Oz here, and today I've got a compilation of r/TraumatizeThemBack for you all. As per usual, this is a way for you to get caught up on past videos that have been long forgotten in the catalog of content this channel uploads. So feel free to take a look, and don't forget to check out GamerSupps. Use code Oz at checkout. This one's brought to us by Jokashi. Boss won't shut up about me not dating, so I give him far more information than what is necessary. Sorry in advance if this is not quite appropriate for the subreddit, but from what I've seen so far, it should fit well. For context, I'm an autistic 18-year-old male who started a new job late last year. Relationships have always been a touchy subject since I was bullied in high school for not being normal, in the sense of having romantic interests, and the fact that I don't like people makes me very scared for my future, as the idea of dying alone and not having a relationship terrifies me. Straight off the bat, my boss was one of those people who couldn't understand that not everyone in life is an alcoholic with a sex addiction. So, he would always be nagging me about whether I have gone out with my mates, or been out of the town, or was going drinking every weekend. I don't drink at all, and my friends and I meet like 2 times a year. His latest obsession at the time was asking whether or not I was dating. Not a simple, do you have a partner, but more of an incessant nag of, have you ever had a girlfriend? Did you date anyone in your high school? Do you have any crushes? Who was that girl I saw you with? Your girlfriend? And the list goes on. I eventually just tell him I don't actually like anyone, nor do I have the capacity to like anyone, as I have never felt the slightest bit of romantic interest in anyone my whole life. He obviously wasn't happy with this and decided to keep going on about, I'll meet a girl and she will change my life, and that I'll change my mind about not wanting kids, and so on and so forth. One day, P starts this again, and I'm really not in the mood, so I just do the usual, I'm incapable of having a relationship because I don't like people. He obviously pushes this matter, stating like some sort of expert how I just haven't met the right girl yet. So, I chip in with, no, seriously, last name. My therapist said that it's likely linked to my mother abusing me as a child. I probably won't ever like anyone, which is all true and actually what my therapist said. Needless to say, he was taken aback, kinda left his mouth open for a bit, and then eventually said, well, before trailing off and conveniently finding something else to do around the shop. Kind of brief, I know, but the priceless look on his face was worth it. He only brought up my biological mother one more time after this on the lines of, so what did your mom, whilst raising a hand, signifying beating. I just told him I'm not willing to talk about it, turning the already awkward conversation for him, that he started, into a very long silence. Since then, he's been more subtle with his probing, but never fully stopped, and it's been one of the many things me and my, much more understanding, colleagues have laughed about. How this boss in question made it into a position of management, I honestly couldn't tell you, because it sounds like he really lacks any social skills, professional skills, or, honestly, just personal boundaries. From the sounds of it, at least the colleagues are very well aware of kind of what's going on, and, he can kind of have a bit of kinship with talking with them, but I don't think the boss was being malicious. I really just think he didn't have a full understanding of personal boundaries, and it sounds like he just has general confusion or a lack of understanding about the fact that, beyond straight, gay, and bisexual and all those, you also have things like asexual and aromantic, where you're not really into people on a romantic level. I think the boss just has never really encountered anyone like that, so it was just a puzzle that had to be solved, or, no one like this could possibly exist. That's just my 2 cents anyways. Doesn't excuse what happened, but hey. This one's brought to us by Eerie Deer. Ignore my medical issues and I get pissy. Oh no, it's the consequences of your actions. When I was in high school, my doctor accidentally let it slip that I'd been formally diagnosed with ADHD 4 years beforehand. My parents hadn't wanted me to use it as a crutch, so they just hadn't told me. I was furious and immediately pressed to start medication and getting education accommodations. My parents sort of sheepishly agreed to everything I asked for, and I started doing well for the first time ever. This is all background info. Sometime later, we had moved, and I was taking a freshman science class in my sophomore year because my old school had done what was effectively the sophomore science in my freshman year. I'm the 16th new kid, and doing standardized testing with a classroom of freshmen, I don't know super well, and suddenly, I have to go to the bathroom. Now, my education accommodations allowed for bathroom breaks whenever, because the medication I was on at the time included fun side effects like bladder control issues. I raised my hand and asked the substitute teacher who was acting as our test proctor while our normal science teacher was on vacation. And she laughed at me. She said she wasn't born yesterday and no amount of accommodations would convince her to let me leave the classroom during standardized testing because I might meet up with a friend who had answers to the test or something. I tried to argue with her and got increasingly more desperate as I explained in hushed whispers what my medication did and its side effects. She continued chuckling and shaking her head with this stupid, bemused smile. I started crying, and before wouldn't you know it, I peed myself. Honestly, the next bits are a blur. I remember the smile slowly falling off her face, and then suddenly I was in the nurse's office wearing gym clothes and listening to my parents scream at the principal in 2 different languages. My parents agreed not to sue if the substitute was fired. She wasn't able to get a job in another school in the area, and the district apparently brought separate charges against her for ignoring accommodations. She had to pay a steep fine. Thankfully, some popular kids decided that anyone who made fun of me about this wouldn't be invited to the cool kid house party, so I was only teased a little bit. Still wasn't popular in high school, but at least my parents became somewhat more supportive of me and my educational needs as a result. Also, I hope the lady enjoys her unemployment as much as I enjoyed watching someone sign my yearbook a few years later to Hiss Girl. I actually had a similar experience to this that got me grounded back when I was in 5th grade. Granted, I wasn't on medication like this individual was, but we had finished something called PACE, which is essentially like an end-of-year kind of project that we had to do as a standardized practice in Idaho. And basically, throughout the entire day, we had to be giving presentations, we were sitting in rooms, we had to sit around, no chance for bathroom breaks, and we were fed lots of apple juice and lots of cookies, so I was pretty much ready to burst by the time that music class had come along. And I was sitting there in music class, had to go, asked to go to the bathroom. Music teacher told me that she didn't care if I wet myself, she could get me a diaper. And the moment she turned her back, I flipped her off. And because the classroom was full of bastards, they all tattled on me. And because they tattled, my dad found out and grounded me. So that sucked. This one's brought to us by Peanut Butter. Mess with the wrong orphan. A delicious revenge story. This is on behalf of my brother-in-law. Background: his mom passed away when he was in his early 20s. Now, we were all at a little gathering last weekend, and one of his friends brought along her husband. Husband is a huge Creed fan. We'll call him Fanboy. Fanboy is going on and on to brother-in-law about how he has to go to an upcoming Creed concert. Brother-in-law tries to politely shut him down. Nah, they're not for me. Really not my speed, etc., etc. Fanboy wasn't getting it. He kept insisting that brother-in-law was wrong for refusing to go to the concert. Finally, brother-in-law had enough. He turns to Fanboy and, in front of everyone, goes, "Dude, the reason I don't like Creed is because on the day of my mom's funeral, my now ex-girlfriend went to a Creed concert instead." Fanboy went white. He just looked and blinked at brother-in-law for a full 5 seconds, desperate to save face. Fanboy goes, "Well, at least you're married to your wife now, so that'll never happen again." Oof, buddy, a softball pitch, really. I braced myself for the inevitable home run, and of course it won't, since both of my parents are dead. Maybe the Fanboy will cool it next time, huh? Skull emoji. I do kind of feel bad for the Fanboy because he was probably just really excited, like, dude, come on, like, I love this music. You gotta give it a shot, man. There's no way you can't love this thing. Probably just really excited and want to have a good time, but at the same time, probably should have picked up on the fact that no does mean no, and he was being polite about it. Just left it there. Also, kind of like a semantic question here, but is someone really an orphan if they're like a grown adult who has lost both parents after they've like turned 18? It's more of a semantic thing, sure, but like, I guess I've never thought about it. Would that make my grandparents orphans? Like genuine question. I mean, he was in his early 20s, as stated in the beginning of it. Like, where does the line get drawn when you become an orphan versus when you're an adult who's lost your parents? Or, I don't know. I think I might just be overthinking this. This one's brought to us by Random Quality. Nurse complains my trauma wasn't painful, so I go into detail. So it's probably going to be a content warning for, medical trauma, so just be prepared. Hi, I just discovered the subreddit and it made me remember an event that happened a while back for me. I, 17 male, had an unfortunate experience during an overnight stay at a hospital when I was 11. It was supposed to be a simple in and out for a smaller surgery, but I unfortunately had a nurse from hell. On the last day, I remember being in so much pain and screaming, but was not offered anything to calm me down when the nurse was doing some gauze removal without anesthesia. On top of this person just being a general asshole when I was asking any questions in general the day prior. Anyways, since then, I've had involuntary panic attacks when it comes to me seeing healthcare workers with anything sharp, even when I'm aware it won't be used on me. It's dwindled over time, but I still get some minor symptoms that usually takes a good few minutes for me to control. A few months back, I was at a hospital for a bad stomach flu. I had an elderly nurse take care of me, and unfortunately my shaking hands caused her to miss an IV insertion twice. I apologized and told her that I was trying to keep my arm steady. It's just hard because of a bad experience with another nurse. Now, she was visibly getting impatient with me, soon saying, "Young people like you can't have an experience that bad. You just need to be more patient," or something very similar to those words. I began to explain to her some parts of what had happened, just the minor details like how traumatizing it was for me. She looked disgusted and continued her rambling with the classical, "When I was your age, I wasn't this scared of needles and certainly can handle this sort of pain." It began to really bug me as she begins to talk up a small story of her own, having a high pain tolerance, to the point where I stopped paying attention to her. At this point, I just say, "So, you've had your gums feel like they were ripped open and your nurse did nothing to help you. That nurse also made an insensitive joke about sharp things too, so you can see why I'm scared of them. Sorry," along with an extra list of how the pain felt with some details that included the affected area. This nurse went rather wide-eyed as I started to go down the list, immediately excusing herself for being invasive of my fears. And luckily, she managed to finish everything quickly after that and leave the room. She didn't bother talking to me after that, apart from the mandatory medical questions, so I think I did a successful job there of getting her to quiet down. This one's brought to us by Das Bar. Didn't look pretty enough 4 hours after my mom died. This happened a really long time ago now, but I have never seen anyone run away from a situation quite so quickly, and sometimes I do wonder what the guy thought or if he learned his lesson. So my mom had been terminal and was in hospice care in her home. We knew time was limited. However, when I'm upset, the first thing to go to hell is my sleep schedule. I had slept for maybe 2 hours that night, and hadn't been getting much more sleep than that for the past few weeks preceding this, but she ended up passing slightly before 4 in the morning that this took place. So, after she passed, I decided I needed caffeine to get through the day, so when the nearest gas station opened up at 8 a.m., I headed over there for some energy drinks. I likely did look a bit of a mess. It's easy to tell when I'm tired, and I was wearing college merch that was much bigger than my usual size. I'd get out of my car and start shuffling through my clothes. I couldn't remember which gigantic pocket I had put my wallet in. While I did that, this man pulls up to a pump in a very shiny car. I don't remember what he looked like beyond that he looked a bit like a very put-together game show host. This man turns to me, he was 20 feet away, so this was all said loudly, and says, "It's a shame someone as pretty can't improve everyone's day with a smile." And I burst out crying. Ugly crying with the sobbing, mouthing, and shaking. Just went from standing there hoping I hadn't left my wallet at home to bawling in the most empty parking lot. I did manage to yell something like, "I'm sorry I'm not fucking pretty enough for you," when my mom died 4 hours ago. Dude turned on his heel and left. Didn't pump gas, didn't go inside for coffee, didn't apologize, just got in his car and left. I was saved from standing in the parking lot sobbing by a woman who I think was jogging and heard what the man and I said to each other, and the employee of the gas station, who were very kind. Edit. Some people seemed to be confused, thinking that being called pretty was a compliment, but really, I didn't look great. I was wearing a hoodie that literally went past my knees and sweatpants stuffed into duck boots. I had dark circles bad enough that someone asked me if a snowball hit me in the face a couple days after this. They thought I had 2 black eyes. My very long hair was piled on top of my head and hadn't been brushed properly. I also get big red blotches on my face when I cry or am cold. Considering it was January, I definitely had a blotchy face, even if it wasn't from crying earlier. Best case scenario, he was complimenting me first to sandwich critique. Worst case scenario, he was being actively passive-aggressive about how I looked. I don't think he woke up that morning and twirled his mustache wanting to make a stranger cry. I think he did an awkward thing he shouldn't have, don't tell women to smile, seriously, and got embarrassed. Something that's probably happened to literally every person who has commented or liked this. Now, the edits tell a really sad story that tell me that everyone in the comments was just like, why didn't you take the compliment? He was obviously just calling you pretty. She basically just encountered a Zap Brannigan type with the, you should smile more. You're prettier when you smile. And was supposed to apparently be happy about that. I mean, for context, think back to any time that you've been told to smile when you were upset and how much that irked you. And now add on top of the fact that her mother just recently passed away. That man deserved the awkward encounter, and I hope to God he never pulls that one out of his pocket again. This one's brought to us by True Difficulty 6291. Nurse said I was squeamish because I hadn't had children yet. I traumatized her by telling her about the illegal medical testing I endured as a child. Quick edit, I'd stupidly used female pronouns for the male nurse in the title. In my native language, the word for nurse is categorized as female, which is why I used her instead of him. Secondly, it's been pointed out to me that this person was most likely a phlebotomist and not a nurse. Sorry for the confusion. This happened a couple weeks ago. My fertility doctor ordered some blood tests for me, 34 female, and I went to my local healthcare clinic to get them done. I have trypanophobia, which I disclosed to the nurse who would be taking my blood. I always need to warn them because I can handle myself okay for around 10 minutes or so, but if the blood draw takes too long, I'm likely to vomit and or faint. I once very embarrassingly threw up on a nurse's shoes. The nurse looks at me like they don't believe me and asks if I have children. I say no. Keep in mind that the labels for my blood test have the word infertility in big bold letters, but whatever. The nurse goes on about how I won't be this squeamish once I have kids. And I'm pretty pissed off at this point as I can already feel a bit woozy, so I say very coldly, I didn't used to be squeamish about needles as a kid, which is why the doctors in my home country volunteered me for medical testing and training. My parents got paid while I was used as a human pincushion for medical trainees. I specifically remember the day they taught students how to draw blood from my neck. The nurse turned white and proceeded to wordlessly draw the blood, and because they took so long, I ended up throwing up, which they had to clean up. Maybe next time they'll learn to listen to their patient. Edit. A lot of people suggested I ask for an emesis bag. I actually had my own sickness bag with me that I used. It's just because the sheer force and volume that I tend to miss, which is always super embarrassing. For those that deal with similar issues, I also bring ice packs and ice water with me, which usually helps a lot too. Edit 2. Some people are confused by the infertility label. I was honestly confused by it too at the time, but it's with KEYZ Permanente, and their clinic has the word infertility in it, so most likely just a shortened way to indicate where to send it to. Edit. To clarify, I wasn't offended by the nurse's comments because of my infertility. It's the offensive and misogynistic assumption that my very real medical condition could be in any way related to whether or not I've given birth. Edit. I think I need to stop with these edits at some point, but just to clarify, they specifically mentioned childbirth, which is why I said it was misogynistic. As far as I know, childbirth doesn't cure trypanophobia. Being squeamish has nothing to do with it. I would clean up vomit and poop every day for the rest of my life if I could avoid another needle. There's a lot of ones in this episode about nurses just kind of not being good to their patients. Is there like a new trend going on or something like that of just nurses not really believing or taking their patients seriously? Or are these rare instances that are so worth note that it actually causes people to talk about it online? Because, I don't know, genuine question. This one's brought to us by BL Hart. Homophobic relative downplays my gay brother's love life, so I ban him from future ceremonies. This relative, I'll call dude, is super religious, Christian, and thus also was a Bible-thumping transphobe plus homophobe. Yes, was. He is starting to get better, but very slowly. My younger brother, I'll call LB for little brother, is both trans male and gay. For context, I'm his older sister, cisgender and attracted to men. Arrow and demi, but attracted to men when my demi shows. One day after I found out about my brother being trans male and gay, and accepting it immediately, he is my best friend in the whole world, so of course I accept him for who he is. My family, parents plus other relatives, found out later on as well, and so everyone was accepting except dude. So one day I decided to sit down with dude and ask him, dude, if my brother were ever to find love and get married to another man, would you be okay with it and attend his wedding? Very quickly he shook his head and replied, no, I would never stoop to that. Now, picture a very horrified and pissed expression from me. A simple no would have sufficed, but saying stoop to that really got my teeth grinding. I have had a history of punching dude for his stupid comments. However, he immediately finished that sentence with, "But if you got married to a man, I would attend the wedding," with a huge smile across his face as if he didn't just insult little brother to my face. So, with the exact same energy he gave me, I shook my head and told him, "No you won't. I would never stoop to that." He was now horrified and shocked by my response, knowing I will not allow him to come to any future wedding of mine for the complete disrespect he made towards little brother to my face. As for my threat, I was 100% genuine. I don't lie when I get my revenge. I always mean what I say, and he knows this too. As I stated before, he has been slowly getting better, especially since he went through 7 years of no contact between me and him. Recently, he came back and told me he wanted to try to be better to me and my brother because he loves us and wants us in his life. So, I accepted, and I can gladly admit I haven't punched him yet for 4 years now. I think the silver lining here is that this family member, or dude as he's called in the story, is actually willing to change and grow from his actions because, a lot of them probably wouldn't. The fact that he is willing to grow as a person does show he does deeply care about, OP and their brothers' identities as individuals, which is more than I could say about a good chunk of people. I do think that re-asking and revisiting the stooping low to, attending a wedding between 2 gay men is definitely something worth poking at, but, I don't know. I'd be curious to get everyone else's thoughts and if they would forgive this family member or how they all feel about it. I'd also be curious to hear from some of the religious members of my community because I know that not all religious people are like this nor hold these kind of bigotries towards others. So, I'd be curious to poke at y'all and see what y'all think. Le petit motet. Steal my mail? Have fun thinking you're cursed. Traumatized. I hadn't thought of this in years until my daughter brought it up and suggested I post it here. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate tag, so please let me know if another one fits better. I'm looking behind us now, across the count of time, down the long hall into the history book. Back in the before times, in the long, long ago. 2020. I'm talking about 2020. At the time, I was living in the Midwest and my daughter was living in the Pacific Northwest. She had started getting into haunted dolls, and when lockdown happened, she picked up customizing porcelain dolls to keep herself occupied. I had sent her a few old dolls I'd found at thrift shops, but when I called her to see what she was going to do with them, she told me she never got the package. That's when she told me that porch piracy had become a huge problem in the town. She said that it had always been an issue, but since lockdown had started, they'd gone beyond blatant. And now, it was almost a guaranteed chance that you wouldn't get your package unless the mail person directly handed it to you. It got to the point that the thieves would literally follow the mail truck and would be walking up to the porch to steal packages as the mail person was walking back to the sidewalk. This, as you can imagine, annoyed me on a personal level. If I was going to spend my own money sending something to my daughter for her to customize, I damn well wanted her to get it, not some random mook off the street. I told her I'd think about it and get back to her, as there was a doll I'd found that I thought would be perfect for a horror customization. Plus, I wanted to support my daughter with her art, so I wanted to commission this doll specifically. The other important factors that contributed to this situation are that I'm pagan. I love ancient fictional languages, and I absolutely love being able to screw with people that deserve it. I spent a few weeks mulling the situation over in the back of my mind and eventually hit on a solution that borrowed heavily from the Satanic Panic, which I had lived through as a kid. Since I wasn't sure that she would actually get the package, I decided to send a backup doll I'd found and plan on sending with the original doll, just in case the original doll got messed up in a way that couldn't be fixed. The doll had a cracked face, was missing an eye, and had a faded, stained blue silk dress, and the hair was a snarled mess. I found a shoebox that fit the doll with a little room to spare and got to work. Now, everything I wrote is approximated because I was an idiot and didn't take a picture before I mailed the box off. Stupid of me. First, I aged some printer paper with coffee, crumpled it up until it was soft, and then cut out 6 squarish pieces, created 2 sigils, and drew them on 2 of the pieces, one small one where the sigil took up most of the paper, and one larger one where the sigil was in the center but had plenty of room around it to write other stuff. The sigils were based on the phrase "fuck off, thief," and "this is not yours." I also used Gallifreyan Translator app and created a symbol that translated into "May you perpetually step on Legos barefoot in the dark." The fourth and fifth pieces of paper had random symbols drawn on them, including alchemical, astrological, and the symbols from some 70s themed metal albums, Led Zeppelin in specific, and random shapes I doodled. The last one I used a Klingon translator and wrote out "fuck you" and "fucking fuck," both phonetically and in the actual Klingon alphabet in a spiral that filled up the entire piece. I took the larger piece with the "not yours" sigil in the middle and wrote phrases cursing them into the 100th generation, accused them of preferring goats as sexual partners, etc. In Norse runes, angelic script, and 2 other languages I don't remember off the top of my head. Then I burned some of the edges and some small spots throughout the papers. Once I was done with that, I rolled the largest piece into a tube, tiled it with black and red ribbons, used wax to seal it, and tied it to the doll's hands over her chest with black twine. I then wrapped 4 of the pieces around the arms and legs of the doll and sealed them with wax, and stuck the last piece, the small sigil, over her face. I used a pentacle wax seal stamp to stick it to her forehead. I wrapped the doll in some ancient tissue paper I'd found in my basement and put it in the shoebox. I added several red, black, gray, and green quartz crystals, as well as some pinches of dried herbs and flowers from my altar supplies. I finished the whole thing off with a short note written on a torn notebook paper that essentially said that I was grateful to get this cursed thing off my hands, that I'd tried to seal the evil spirit possessing the doll as best I could, but I didn't guarantee it would work, and that it was the buyer's problem now. No refunds, no returns, and if the buyer died, not my fault. I went absolutely cheesy 80s horror movie with the note. It was completely histrionic and overblown. I figured that anyone sensible would think that this was a prank or a prop or some "I'm so dark and spooky" teenager trying too hard to be dark and spooky. But mostly I wanted to make my daughter laugh or at least momentarily freak out whomever stole the box. Admittedly, I'd picked up this doll because it struck me as looking rather creepy to begin with, so all the set dressing fit the doll well. I wrapped the box in duct tape, then in brown grocery bag paper, added some more random symbols on the seams, and mailed it off to my daughter. The aftermath. She said that she got the notification that the doll had gotten delivered, but when she went to retrieve it, nothing was there. A few hours later, she was sitting in the living room when she heard a loud thump against the door and heard the sound of a vehicle speeding off down the hill. When she opened the door, she found a ripped open and hastily retaped box containing only 2 things: the doll, buried in what looked like 2 full canisters of Morton's salt. She thought that was odd, but forgot to ask about the salt when she texted me to let me know the doll had actually made it. We were talking about the doll last year when she asked me why I'd sent it in salt. I asked her what she was talking about, and after she described how the doll arrived, I told her how I'd actually packed it up. She was kind of bummed that she didn't get to see it in all its ridiculous glory, but mentioned that they haven't had a problem with porch pirates since then. So, I guess the local porch pirates were so terrified of the curse they may have unleashed on themselves that they avoided this area since then. I genuinely thought the whole thing was so over the top and cheesy, it would be obvious it was fake. But whomever stole it the first time was so terrified that they had to drown the doll in salt to break the curse. I genuinely hope they step on Legos barefoot to this day. Edited to add. I put this in a comment, but I thought I would add it here because why not? This is my personal headcanon for what happened between the box being stolen and being returned. I picture one of them frantically Googling how to break curses or stop an evil spirit while the other was driving and shouting about how it was all the other person's fault for suggesting they steal packages in the first place. Then both of them in Safeway quietly arguing about whether or not table salt would work or if they needed kosher salt when something further down the aisle randomly falls on the floor due to being precariously stacked on the shelf. Them panicking and grabbing 2 canisters of Morton's before fast walking back to the car. In the 10 minutes it takes to drive from Safeway to the house, the driver is reciting every prayer they remember. Badly. While the other one is pouring salt in the box and apologizing to the spirit for taking it without permission. Then, 4 months after, any minor inconvenience was blamed on the doll. It eventually becomes a family legend of how everything that's gone wrong for all of them is the fault of this one box they never should have opened. The box. You opened it, we came. Didn't open the box, and what was it last time? Didn't know what the box was, and yet we do keep fighting each other, don't we? Yes, I know my imagination is running away with this scenario, and no, I don't think this is what actually happened, but in the absence of any ability to know the truth, this scene makes me laugh. Well, that was a delightful read. It seems that Mark Rober has some competition, and porch pirates are honestly the worst. I have only ever had one thing stolen off my porch, and it was my HelloFresh box. That one honestly really sucked because it's just like, that's $90 down the drain right there, and that was supposed to be like half of this week's food. So that was super cool. I'm gonna wing this one for nil. They made me make them uncomfortable. A few years ago, I received a call from a popular charity. The woman thanked me for my previous support. I quickly informed her that I was currently unable to financially support them. She continued by informing me there were multiple ways to support them and she was sure they could find one to fit my budget. I again informed her that I was not in a position to help. Not missing a beat, she began telling me my options. I then firmly told her I had recently become a widow. I had not only lost my husband's income, but the grant funding my position had run out. Not allowing her to respond, I then went on to explain that I was trying to pay for the funeral and the lawyer sorting the estate, as there was no will, all on unemployment benefits. She began stammering and told me she was sorry for my loss before hanging up. I cheekily asked if she was sorry for the loss of my husband, the loss of his income, or the loss of my job. We widows have to find joy somewhere, and I have been enjoying making spam callers and pushy charity workers uncomfortable. First off, I'm horrendously sorry for your loss. That's not going to be fun at all, and as someone who's dealt with lawyers, that is expensive. That is incredibly expensive to deal with. So I could really only hope that things eventually get sorted out for you. On the other hand, I'm extremely pleased that you've at least managed to find one of the few benefits you have that's making pushy scam people incredibly uncomfortable with their job and making them quiver in their chair just for a little bit before they call the next person. Good on ya. Lalinade 2. Teacher insists I talk to my mother. Matched energy. This was back in school when I was 15 or 16-ish. I had moved to the area suddenly and had a lot of accommodations, so most of the teachers didn't know specifically what was going on in my life, but most knew it was pretty messed up and there was an ongoing police investigation. Guess this teacher missed the memo. I was talking about prom tickets and how I collected them as I qualified for free ones. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, so I'm kinda paraphrasing. Teacher, you just need to get your mom to email to claim as many tickets as you need. Me? Okay, I'll ask my dad to do that. She mentioned a few other things, but every time ignoring my subtle correction and asking me to talk to my mom. After 4 times, I lost my temper and went, alright, since you insist, I'll drive for 2 hours, find my highly abusive mother in police custody and reconnect with her just to ask her permission for some prom tickets. Or I could ask my dad at home. It was here that she just went completely silent and a couple nearby teachers gave her judgmental looks and I walked away. Teachers should honestly know better than to assume all kids have parents, especially both. There was another time like a month after I moved where we had an English class assignment to read and write poems about our mother on Mother's Day. So it was already a pretty sore day for me. I just left. Should have written some poems about how she beat me for laughing wrong to teach them not to do this shit. I would say that for teachers, it's probably pretty rare for them to encounter a circumstance like this, so it's probably not very common they need to put these kind of accommodations down. But I would also assume that as a teacher, you should probably pick up on the subtle cues that your students are giving about, possibly a parent not being around so you don't make a complete goober of yourself. That's just my personal thought, though. Person that's queer. Nice. You stalk me, I'll stalk you back. Matched energy. Sorry for this post being long. Also, this is my first post, and I'm unsure what flair to use. This happened some time ago, over the course of November 2022 to February 2023. But I got reminded of this because I saw the person in question again recently. So I, 19, trans male to female, got stalked by a stranger. I didn't know them at all, and for some reason they had decided to stalk me. This started out as him commenting on an Instagram story of mine where I was wearing a crop top. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was basically a threat to beat me up if he ever were to see me IRL wearing femme clothing. I didn't think much of it at first, just blocked and reported him and went on with my day. I thought it was over, until I got a random DM of a new account with a similar name to the first, containing a picture of me coming out of the store with some friends with the text, "Shame you're with people right now." I got freaked out and showed my friends this message and they kept an eye out. I blocked and reported that account as well and went on with my day. I almost forgot about it until a few weeks later I received another DM that was similar to the previous one. Only this time, it was me sitting in a park. It happened a couple more times until a friend figured out that the original Instagram account he texted me with was the personal account of the guy stalking me. We went to the police regarding the situation, but they said that there was nothing they could do about it as there was no physical threat. Mind you, by this point, I had become extremely paranoid, always watching my surroundings, never going out alone, and was also extremely careful. I told my friends what the police said regarding the situation, and one of them came up with the idea of doing the same thing back to him since we managed to figure out who it was. My friend, let's call them AF, or Amazing Friend, contacted a friend of theirs, let's call them Chad. And together they kept a close eye on the dude's Insta. Whenever I went out, I always left my home with AF. Meanwhile, his friend Chad was waiting a little bit of a distance away, keeping an eye out on us to see if we were being followed. After a few days of this, it finally happened. My friend and I got followed. Chad notified us about it through text and we decided to go to the nearest park. Sure enough, we got followed there. Almost 5 minutes after we got to the park, we got to our usual hangout spot. Sure enough, within a minute, I received a message containing a photo of me and my friend sitting there. We notified Chad, who proceeded to take a picture of the stalker and send it to me. I proceeded to reply to the stalker with the photo containing him. His response was golden. First, he replied with, "How?" And then, we got a text from Chad saying the dude was quickly going away. We ordered Chad to follow him, which he did. Chad kept sending me photos of my stalker, which I kept passing on to the stalker. Eventually, I got blocked and never heard anything from the stalker again. Now, while this did have a happy ending, it does kind of irk me a bit that I already know for a fact that when women report a stalker, they're not taken seriously in the slightest. So I can't even imagine how much more difficult it would be if you're a trans male to female individual trying to go to the police station talking about a potential stalker. They're not gonna take you seriously at all, and that shit sucks. And that's just, I guess at this point, the trans experience, huh? That fucking blows. Legalize positivity. My God wouldn't let that happen. Hello, it's my first time in the subreddit and I have a small story to share. So I volunteer with an organization that helps human trafficking survivors reintegrate back into society and provide food, shelter, job training, all things like that. One of the things we offer is a jewelry making position where survivors can make jewelry, get paid, and then we sell the jewelry at craft fairs and such to raise awareness and funds to give back to the girls. So I'm working this craft fair, and this older lady from another stand comes up. I want to say she was maybe around 60. She looks me dead in the eyes and goes, "Trafficking doesn't exist in America." Just, what? I'm sorry, what? This exploded a fire deep within my soul. For context, I'm a human trafficking survivor myself. I survived 10 years of grooming and 10 gruesome days at a first location before managing to escape before getting to the secondary location. So, for this lady to straight up say that this didn't exist, set me off. I calmly tried to explain to her that it did exist, but when she kept insisting to the point where she was saying things like, "My God wouldn't let that happen," I had had enough. I looked this lady in the eyes and said, "Well, I guess I didn't almost get sent overseas by some crazy people and survive countless hours of abuse then because I don't exist." Her face went white. She looked down and slowly walked away to her booth. The neighboring booth had heard the whole thing and came over and bought a few bracelets in support. So that was nice. Moral of the story, kids, this world is a messed up place. Crazy things do happen in places you may deem safe. See, this is just rude entitlement coming from someone who's never actually had a day of suffering in their life. I can hardly fathom the kind of pain that this individual went through during their life to get to where they are now. And yeah, them being upset is entirely justified because that's fucked up to pretty much have your entire existence minimized to, "My God wouldn't let that happen." Well, guess what? It did happen. Decadent life. Student thought he'd be bold, matched energy. This happened a couple of decades ago when I was teaching summer school for kids in junior high. I was 4 months pregnant, and this one kid who was always trying to mess with the teachers and get attention went just a little too far. We were off to the side, I wasn't teaching at the moment, and he stepped very close to me, face to face, and he said, "What would you do if someone hit you and killed your baby right here, right now?" I stepped even closer, and in a low voice I said, "I would fucking kill them, right here, right now." His face changed to a look of shock with just a tiny sliver of fear. He wasn't sure if I meant it or not, and after this, his behavior greatly improved. Not a bad kid all around. Just needed some trauma. Just as a heads up for my dark humor enthusiasts, this right here is not dark humor. This is just you being a fucking asshole. Dark humor is at its best when it's told within the proper audience. Going up to a pregnant teacher and telling her that someone might kill their baby is not dark humor. Dark humor has a time and a place and people to be told around, but this is certainly not it. Please don't refer to me. You want proof I'm injured? Okay. Malicious compliance. This happened about 5 years ago, so some of the details are a bit blurry, but I remember most of what happened. About 5 years ago, I had some major anger issues caused by other undiagnosed mental issues. I'm okay now and I'm properly medicated. I ended up slamming my door, which caused my mirror to break and slice my left leg open. Stupid mistake, I know. I've learned since then. I ended up going to the hospital to get about 48 stitches. I had to miss a couple of days of school because the doctor told me to take it easy for 48 hours. When I finally went back to school, I had crutches because I couldn't put any weight on the injured leg at all. I got an elevator key and needed people to help me with my books. I kept pain meds with the nurse because, again, 48 stitches. She never liked me for some reason, so when I went to get half a pill during lunch, she refused to give it to me. Here's how the exchange went. Nurse, you don't need any meds. You're fine. No, I do need them. I'm in a lot of pain. Stop faking and go back to lunch. Oh, and leave your crutches here. You don't need them. Now, I was in a lot of pain, so I was already not in a good mood, so this really pissed me off. How about you do your damn job and give me my meds, then I'll go back. I have an ungodly amount of stitches in my leg, and I'm already upset enough without you being rude. How do I know that you're actually injured? You could just have a bandage around your leg. All right, you want proof? Yes. Without hesitation, I untied the gauze on my leg, removed the gauze pad, and showed her my stitched wound. All of the color drained from her face, and she looked like she was going to throw up. Is this good enough for you? After a moment, she silently unlocked her medicine cabinet and handed me my painkiller bottle, which was literally just extra strength ibuprofen, not opioids, so I have no idea why she was so protective of it. Take your pill and go back to lunch. I smiled at her as sweetly as possible. Oh, I can't go back now. My bandages aren't sterile anymore, so I need to change them. I had brought extra bandages just in case, so this was no big deal. She still looked nauseous at this point, so I changed my bandages as slowly as I could, making sure she got a good look at my leg the entire time. I only had to go back to her office twice during my recovery, but each time, she didn't hesitate to give me my medication. I saw her when I went to return my elevator key, and she avoided eye contact with me. She wasn't working there the following year, luckily. Now, I do personally feel that with the passage of time that some of the details of the conversation have gotten a bit muddied in the specific favor of the poster. Do I doubt the story happened? Not at all. I've had some pretty shitty circumstances with school nurses too. I literally once fell off playground equipment and couldn't properly breathe for a couple hours and was literally wheezing with every breath. And the nurse sat there and was like, "Bah, this should do the trick," and handed me a glass of ice water. It was then that I came to realize that school nurses are nothing more than glorified ice pack dealers, and not actually nurses. Now, sure, school nurses have most certainly seen their fair share of kids faking illness and ailments to get out of school, but at the same time, the kids bandaged and wearing crutches and asking for a pain medication in an orange bottle should probably give it to them. For more reasons beyond the fact that I'm pretty sure it's against the law to withhold medication. This one's brought to us by Key Dentist 6421. Pilots try to make me nervous about flying. Hi, I'm new here. I have a story set way back in 1998, when a person could still smoke on selective flights and being asked up to the cockpit was a normal thing. I was a fresh-faced 22-year-old woman who was getting on a plane to go from Burma to England. I had just broken up with a boyfriend whom I had left the relative comfort of my home country, New Zealand, to be with. I was a bit of an emotional mess, but I decided to not go home, but instead to go to England to do my big OE, like so many New Zealanders do. I had to Google what OE meant because I'm from Idaho, and it means overseas experience. Yeah, definitely would not have known that. I stepped on the plane and noticed that it was only half full. Great, I can wallow in my misery in a corner somewhere. But as I walked onto the plane, I heard a familiar and comforting accent. The pilots greeting the passengers were Australian. I say hello, and they, appreciating a familiar accent, invite me to the cockpit for both the takeoff and landing. I was offered a first-class meal in the cockpit and a first-class seat for the flight. I'm in the cockpit and I notice the pilots are having a conversation about how drunk they have gotten the night before, and how they had gotten no sleep. One was lamenting about how he had been called in, right in the middle of a good night out. I caught them smiling at each other and loving how uncomfortable and frightened they were making me. So, the head pilot turned to me and asked me if I had been on many flights. I looked at him straight in the eye and said, "No, I tend to stay off airplanes because my mother died in an airplane crash a few years ago. This is only my second flight since that happened." Oh, you could have heard a pin drop. It is true, by the way. She died in 1995 in a crash that happened in New Zealand. In the end, at least I got first-class service and a story to tell you all. Also a memory of when we could wander onto a plane, have a cigarette, and visit the pilots in the cockpit. It's always odd to hear stories of the times when pilots didn't have double-shielded blast doors protecting them and you could smoke on a plane. Personally, I don't think I could survive because my lungs and allergies would try to fucking kill me if I was on a plane with cigarette smoke for that long. Definitely not a fan of that. You do you. I grew up with smokers, so I'm used to it and I understand it, but I can't personally handle that kind of stuff, man. Only a cruel and unforgiving deity would make one of the hottest things a human can do into one of the most foul-smelling possible things to accompany it. It's just messed up, man. Liv Hannah. Parents took my sister to Disneyland but left me. I found out about it later. Actually, in hindsight, it's a terribly sad story, but when it was happening, I thought I was striking back and hard at the people who had hurt me. I had a so-so childhood. On one hand, we never lacked anything materially, but we had a very complicated family situation. After the divorce, my mother took me, while my father took my sister. The worst part for me was that I grew up in a home with two abusive, cruel people, my mother and stepfather, and my sister grew up with my very sensitive and kind father and a gentle and good stepmother. So I kind of felt like I had lost and she had won the lottery called parents. But of course, it wasn't her fault. Nobody's fault. Fate, chance, the foolishness of adults. We all, both families, had an arrangement that we, sisters, would always be taken on vacations together. That means if my mother and stepfather wanted to take me somewhere, they would take my sister too, and vice versa. When my father and his wife went somewhere, they would take me along with my sister. The idea was for us to stay in touch, but also to avoid favoring either of us. But I had a dream. I desperately wanted to go to Disneyland. I asked for it many times, but there was never an opportunity. It didn't really matter because we traveled to different countries, and even within our country, we went to very interesting and beautiful places. In that regard, I really couldn't complain. Until one day, for some reason I don't even remember, I was alone at my father's house. Hours passed, and this was a time when you could only have internet via phone cable, so, out of boredom, I reached for the shelf with the photo albums. Yes, back in the day, our photos were kept in albums. That was a mean voice to do. I was browsing through various memories until I came across some photos. My father and his wife had taken my sister to Disneyland, and they didn't take me. My probably then 15-year-old heart broke. It must have happened a good 2 or 3 years earlier, and no one told me. Not even my sister. They just kept it a secret. I flipped through page after page and cried, photo after photo. How happy they looked. I cried, like a lot. But time passed and I put the albums back on the shelf. I actually wanted to talk to them about it, ask about it. But when they came back, my sister was elsewhere, only the adults returned. They asked how I was feeling and if I had been bored. And I just couldn't start the subject, so I said I had been wandering around the apartment, picked up a few books, which was true, and then started looking at the photos. I was hoping for some reaction, but they probably didn't even remember what photos were there, so they were happy. And, did you have a good time? I was stunned, and I decided to start testing them now. Well, great, I said, but I'd like to look at the photos with you because I don't remember everything. Will you tell me about some of the pictures? Sure, they both replied. And my father reached for the first album from the shelf, with the oldest photos. I had the impression he hesitated, but he understood what was hidden 3 albums further down, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he invited me to the kitchen. We'll look at them there, he said. We'll make some coffee and tea and we can talk. But I don't want to, I said. It's so comfortable here, on the couch. There's only chairs in the kitchen. "Then we'll go to another room," my father said, literally lifting me up by the shoulders and leading me away. I gave in. Okay, let it be. I already know what you're doing, and you don't yet know what I'm doing, I thought. They both sat next to me, him and her, and we looked at the photos from the first album. "Next," I said when we finished that one, and so on, until they said there were no more. I replied. Impossible. There was a red one on the shelf, and there's no red one here. Something's missing. No, my father replied. There's nothing else there. Oh, of course there is. I shouted like a 5-year-old and ran to the room before anyone could stop me. And there was no album. They had already hidden it. I returned to them and asked where the red album was. And they said they never had a red album, that I was mistaken and that it was time for dinner. I said nothing. I looked them in the eyes, searching for any understanding, some truth. Both were sweating, stressed as hell, but the thought of finally getting out of this uncomfortable situation, going to make dinner, saved them. I stayed the night because I had no choice, and in the morning, just before leaving, I left a photo on the bed that I had taken while browsing. A photo of the three of them, smiling, happy, at Disneyland. All while I experienced abuse from my parents almost every day. About 15 minutes after I left, the calls from my father and stepmother started, but I didn't answer. For 2, maybe even 3 years, I didn't answer. My heart was broken. Later, we reconnected, and today we live quite normally and in friendship. I forgave them long ago, but somehow I just can't forget. I mean, yeah, you were fucking betrayed. That stings. A lot. God damn. I'm going to have to pose this question to the audience here because I grew up an only child and my parents divorced. So for me, originally when growing up, it was 2 days on, 2 days off, 3 days on, 2 days off, 2 days on, 3 days off. This way each parent would essentially get me for an equal amount of time over a period of 2 weeks. This later changed when I turned around 8 to week on, week off. But with siblings, why isn't it just that one parent gets both siblings at the same time and the other one gets, a week off without the siblings? Why are they choosing one specific sibling to raise in an entirely different environment? That doesn't, to me that doesn't make sense. Maybe to someone who's been in this situation that does make sense, but that does create situations like this where there's bound to be favoritism and there's bound to be events like this. This is actually really heartbreaking. So please, I know the criteria is a little bit odd, but if you have any experience with parents being divorced and growing up with a sibling and dealing with an alternating schedule, I would love to hear if segregating the siblings like this is normal, because this seems developmentally hell. Sheer cold, 12/28. She didn't think it would happen, but it did. Now everyone knows. Alright, first time posting here, and this probably isn't as crazy as some of the other posts here, but here we go. Now, for some context, I'm autistic, female, have a slew of other mental issues, and was diagnosed with both epilepsy and a migraine disorder back in 2016. The reason why this matters is because I had a lot of accommodations in place due to these issues, one of which being the ability to leave the building 5 minutes before a fire drill. This is extremely important. So this happened my senior year of high school, 2019. I was 18 years old at the time. It was just a normal April morning when I was told by a teacher that there would be a fire drill later in the day. This obviously caught me off guard and I began to worry, so I went to go see my in-school therapist. Let's call her BM. She lets me into her office and I voice my nervousness about the upcoming drill. Cue the usual, try to calm this person down tactic. That's when I say to her, I might have a seizure. Her response, no you won't. Now I'm going to have you leave with everyone else. Yes, you read that right. She outright decided to ignore my accommodation that had been followed for years just because she wanted to. Now I'm even more anxious, but her mind was made up and I couldn't change it. Time skipped to 12 o'clock and the fire alarm goes off. As instructed, I leave with the rest of my class and head from the second floor to the football field. While outside, I turn to a classmate and ask if my pulse is fast. She checks and says it's fine. That's good. Fire drill's over and we head back up to the second floor. While my teacher is getting ready to unlock the classroom door to let us back in, my vision goes black. Next thing I know, I'm on the ground. The nurse is helping me sit up while paramedics rush to get me onto a stretcher. Down the elevator, out of the school, into the ambulance, and straight to the hospital. Yep, I jinxed it. While waiting to get back into class, I ended up having a stress-induced grand mal seizure at school, something I was afraid of after being diagnosed. Needless to say, my parents were none too happy about what had happened, and BM was left with a permanent reminder to actually listen and not brush things off. But hey, on the bright side, I graduated almost 2 months earlier than everyone else due to the incident. It's stories like these that make me realize that my in-school counselor back when I was in high school was actually goated beyond belief. She was actually able to recognize signs of depressions in students before it actually hit them. She was fantastic with helping students navigate and mitigate their stress throughout life, and honestly, just goated all around. I have a memory of dealing with a teacher when I was dealing with my first job, and I was in fast food and having to deal with both an abusive boss and being forced to essentially kill mice with my bare hands or threaten being fired. I was too young to know to report the restaurant for health code violations or other things like that, so I just kind of had to deal with it. This was affecting my attitude in class. Obviously, it's not easy to come back after, hitting a mouse on a table and watching the life drain from its eyes. It fucks with you. I had not been desensitized to that kind of interaction yet. So when I was at school, it was definitely messing with my ability to appear happy. Now, in the specific class that I was in, they graded your professionalism. If you even looked unhappy, you would lose marks. You would end up going from an A to a B. Now me, being a 4.0 student, that was only more stress, because now I was stressing about whether or not I looked happy or not. And I told the counselor about this, and my grades suddenly changed for the better within a matter of moments, and that was pretty cool. It's actually nice having someone in your school who's willing to stand up for the students when bullshit's awry. Green Fawn enter. Teacher won't let me drink water in class, so I gave him a detailed description of my medical issues. Some context first. This happened when I was in high school, so a little over 10 years ago. I am French. So, that was... I don't know why I did that. I am French, so sorry in advance for any mistakes or weird phrasing. The teacher I'll be talking about was my French teacher, so I think it'd be the same thing as an English teacher is in the US, UK, English-speaking countries. For various reasons, I went to a private high school, which in France often means religious high schools. We didn't have Catholicism classes or anything like that, but there was the option to have faith breakfasts before class to discuss religion and faith, and things like that. But the main difference with French public high school are the rules. Stricter dress code, skirt and shorts not above knee level. No shorts or open shoes for boys, no cleavage allowed, no tank tops, no piercings, even on the ears, etc. A no phone on school ground policy. And, of course, no drinking or eating during class. Not even water, because there has been cases of students putting clear alcohol instead of water in their bottles. Now, to the story. So I was around 17 and I recently had urinating pain, feeling like cystitis, urinary tract infection. After analysis and a bladder ultrasound, I was relieved that I had crystals in my bladder. This was the beginning of renal calculus, so obstruction of my urinary tract, and if not treated, I could end up with kidney stones before turning 18. I don't have the best of health, but even I was shocked. The treatment? Drinking a lot, and a lot. And then again, a lot of water, with low calcium in it, and hope it would suffice. The school policy was no drinking in class, not even water, but most of the teachers were lenient because in the high school and in most French schools, there's no AC. So in the summer, you don't want the kids to get dehydrated, or worse, have heat strokes occurring, because small private high school means no infirmary. So during the first half of the day, I had my little water bottle and would take sips regularly, refill it while taking a bathroom break between classes. Then the afternoon begins with 2 hours of French class. I put down my papers and pens, then my water bottle, and the teacher immediately says loudly in a condescending tone, "You know, miss, my family name, that no drinks or food are allowed in class." I try to ask for an exception, but he interrupts me, still condescending. "You surely can manage 2 small hours without drinking. It's not like it'll kill you." Looking back, it probably wouldn't have killed me, but I was 17, in pain because of the crystals, and really stressed at the idea of having kidney stones, because I heard the pain is worse than giving birth, and I'm sensitive to pain. So, as the class was not yet started, and not everyone was seated, I went to the teacher's desk to talk more privately. "I know, sir, that not even water is allowed in class, but I had a urine analysis and a bladder ultrasound very recently that showed crystals inside my bladder. The doctor urgently encouraged me to drink 2 or 3 times more water, or I could have calculus in my kidneys before graduation. I have pain medication in the meanwhile to help me going to the toilets without crying because it burns like hot razors when I urinate, but it doesn't remove all the pain, and I'm really scared for my health, as nephrocolic would mean hospitalization and missing class, so I'm really sorry to insist, but could you please make an exception, at least until my health is better? He was dumbfounded and looked embarrassed, then stuttered a bit before saying, "Oh, okay, fine, I hope you'll be okay." Between the amount of medical terms I just threw at him and the seriousness of the matter, he had no way of denying me a poor water bottle. For the rest of the day, he wouldn't look at me. Why is the socioeconomic status of the water bottle important? For the rest of the day, he wouldn't look me in the eyes, and I think he passed the news to my other teachers, because some of them would look at me with sympathy even though I never told any other teacher. Might sound stupid, but to this day I'm proud of myself, because that teacher was really not agreeable, and I was a people pleaser and a doormat, but I stood my ground that day. A lot of this could have probably just been avoided if they didn't have the no water in class policy, and if I'm gonna be honest with you, the whole thing of students putting clear alcohol in bottles during class, I always assumed that was a myth because one, you're gonna be able to smell it. Who the hell is just drinking straight fucking vodka or hard liquor from a bottle? Because I can't think of many other alcohols that are clear like water that you'd be able to pass off as water, and I don't think there's many high schoolers just sipping on straight vodka during class. I understand that you Europeans have different rules when it comes to alcohol that us American minds can't comprehend, but still, is that common? For just like in Europe maybe? For students to put clear alcohol in water bottles? Like, is that just something that happens out there? Because I've never seen it here in the US, personally. It might happen here, and maybe I'm just a sheltered little bitch that doesn't pay attention to his classmates to his snitching point. I don't know. That one pansexual. One. Or not even the first, they're actually the second. I told you to let me go down to the nurse. I don't know if this really goes here, but I don't know where else to put it. For context, I have an extremely bad tree nut allergy. My reaction also doesn't set in until 30 minutes to an hour later. My reaction is literally not being able to breathe or having a very hard time breathing depending on the nut, and also hives, before ending off on puking my guts out if I'm lucky enough, or fainting/dying if I'm unlucky. I also didn't have an EpiPen at the time because it's too expensive, and my parents' insurance did not cover it. The teachers would also loudly proclaim each of the students who had allergies' names and what their allergy was, so everyone in the school knew I had a tree nut allergy. Story. Some of my classmates decided to be funny to give me a Nutella brownie during lunch. I did not know that it had Nutella in it. Science was the next class after lunch, so I went to class thinking nothing was wrong. I was paying attention until suddenly I had a very weird feeling that I was very familiar with. I tried brushing it off as accidentally eating something bad or just being a little sick, but then it got worse. I raised my hand and asked the science teacher if I could go down to the nurse. She said no because I looked fine and she was giving an important lecture. At this point, I started having difficulties with breathing. I started telling her that I can't breathe, and she brushed it off as just some attention-seeking stunt. This was during the BLM protests, and I'm black. At this point, other students that I was friends with and knew the signs of my allergic reaction started telling her to let me go to the nurse. I felt like I was about to puke, so I walked up to the front of the room and used hand motions to ask to go to the bathroom. She told me to sit back down. Just as she told me that, I puked all over her and her shirt. She started screaming at me and asking what the fuck was wrong with me, and I think she even said that I was gonna get suspension. I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "I told you to let me go to the nurse," before coughing a lot. I went down to the nurse after that, and she shot me with the EpiPen that's in her office. I got sent home after that, but my friends texted me that the nurse and vice principal told off the science teacher. My friends and I also got free snacks from the vice principal for good behavior, and the rest of my science class and teacher got to have after-school lessons on allergies and medical conditions in general. The kids who gave me the brownie got suspended and expelled later for stealing $50 from another student. I think a good chunk of this kind of does boil down to whether or not the teacher knew you were having an allergic reaction, or if she just thought you were, like she has probably seen in the past, faking an illness to get out of class during a lecture. I don't know, doesn't excuse all of the teacher's behavior, but it could be a reason for it. I do think that if the kids knew that they were giving you a spiked brownie, that they should probably get charges for that, because that could have been attempted murder. I am sometimes sympathetic towards teachers because I know they kind of have a lot on their plate and they're underfunded and they're dealing with a lot, and you never know which students are faking it or just trying to get out of class. But as for the kids, yeah, I got no pity for that. Sophia Alvin Kitten. Keep touching my wheelchair when I've told you no, get slapped and shunned. Oh no, it's the consequences of your actions. I'm a wheelchair user. Wheelchairs are considered extensions of our bodies, and touching their chair without permission is a no-no. Moving someone's wheelchair without asking is an even bigger no-no. I'd explained to a classmate, again and again, all that it was rude, inappropriate, and even harassment that he kept touching my chair or moving me without asking, and when I told him not to, he not only kept doing it, but he was insistent that he had the right to do so. I'd even gone as far as to illustrate the issue to him by getting permission to touch his shoulder or elbows and moving him out of the way, or leaving my hands on his shoulders and leaving them there until it was awkward. Even this didn't dissuade him or change his entitled insistence that he had the right to touch my chair whenever he wanted to, when I told him no. But usually, he'd let go, kind of scoff, and move on. This was over the course of most of a college semester. It was a voice class at community college, so there were less than 20 of us, so our professor had witnessed many of these incidents. One day, when he touched my chair again and wouldn't move his hand when I politely asked him to stop, he refused to let go and insisted that he wasn't doing anything wrong and that he had the right to do so, it wasn't a big deal, etc. I had had enough, and that he had continued to touch me, my chair, and extension of my person, etc., etc. I turned my chair around lightning fast, grabbed his stunned hand hard enough to hopefully bruise. I've got good upper body and hand grip strength. Pulled him down as harshly as I could and then slapped him in the face hard. The rest of the class heard the slap and his pained and surprised yelp and turned to look at us. He screamed and ran over to the professor to whine that I'd grabbed him and hit him. The professor just kind of shrugged and said something along the lines of, "She told you to stop touching her." He kept whining about it to the professor that I'd be punished for assaulting him, etc., only for the professor and the rest of the class to just ignore him that day, and for the rest of the semester. Mind you, I'm a very chill person, unless you count childlike excitement, glee about life, that kind of stuff, and am never violent as well as being patient to a fault, so I don't retaliate nearly ever or easily, but frankly, this was self-defense, pure and simple. In any case, the whole class had heard me explain time and time again not to touch me or my chair, and how and why it was inappropriate, and had asked if I needed help, but I'd always declined. To me personally, it's not that big of a deal if someone who doesn't know better touches my wheelchair. I just explain why it's wrong, but that he was so entitled that he had the right to and wouldn't take no for an answer was what made it an actual issue. And I'd been much more patient than he deserved because he was not very bright, but not disabled or autistic. I'd asked about the autism because in a polite way by sharing that I'm autistic, and even if he were, he would be high functioning enough for it to be inexcusable. At the end of the class that day, I got a lot of high fives and he kept distance from me, occasionally glancing over at me fearfully. The last third or so of the semester, and no one wanted to work with him when we were paired up in groups of 3 to 4 to work on songs together. People for the most part didn't love working with him before, but after, it became clear that the professor was on my side, not his. It was as if he was invisible. Okay, I got a really embarrassing and almost shameful story to tell from when I was 16 and volunteering. So Idaho has this thing called Shakespeare at the park, and I volunteered as kind of like a, I think I would actually classify it as a bellhop. I had volunteered as kind of a bellhop where I would help people to their seats. This is an amphitheater, so there are stairs. You might be able to see where this is going. And it's kind of, most of it's ramped up, but there's kind of stairs going up and down. And I received no training, just look at their tickets, guide them to their seat. I didn't know what my options were, I didn't know how to handle anything, and I volunteered because it meant I got to watch Shakespeare for free, but at the same time, it also counted for community hour credits for my school. So here's the bad part. This guy and his family came through. He was in a wheelchair. Their seat was at the very, very top of the stairs, and I had no training to deal with it. I didn't know what my options were, and I look back at this and I cringe hard because my first thought was, oh, can you guys just like carry him up there? This moment haunts me to this day, and I feel guilt about it to this day, but eventually we did manage to get one of the actual park owners and to come down and be like, oh yeah, no, this is fucked up. Let's get you like an actual seat to like, that's within range. basically they got a seat upgrade and, you know, all was well. But I still just every now and then just look back at that and just with pure, just fearful cringe, remember that and the looks on all of their faces and the backtracking that a 16-year-old me had to do. Oh, I didn't know any better, but I'm still sharing it because it's funny, but it hurts. Princess Torrington. And SFW, unfortunately my daughter being dead is always a trump card. Oh god. What a quirky name followed up by an incredibly depressing title. There have been several similar conversations, but the first time was when a drunk bloke in the pub told my husband and I that our dog was spoiled and tried to peg us as rich, child-free, carefree people obsessed with their dog who probably hate kids, paraphrasing slightly as he was drunk and not making total sense. Me. Yeah, he's pretty spoiled. He deserves it though for getting us through the death of our daughter a few months ago. I don't think we would have managed without him, so he deserves all the treats, to be honest. The drunk bloke seemed to die a little inside and tried to backtrack and apologize. Moral of the story, don't presume anything about other people's lives. Then a shh emoji. Well, shit. Yeah, that's... ugh. Well, I'm incredibly sorry for your loss, Princess Toadington. I'm very happy that you have a dog, though, to keep you and your husband company. That's pretty cool. I'm a big fan of that. Not the dog part, of course. I'm not good at this, alright? I'm so sorry. Please continue to dunk on the drunk blokes who wander around and assume things about people, and make sure your dog gets lots of love. Please. I see. 2800. You are now using my back scratcher to serve your pasta. I have one of those plastic spaghetti spoons, you know, with those little claws with the holes in the middle, and it recently got broken and I've been using it as a back scratcher, so it's usually somewhere in the region of the couch. Yes, I clean it daily. So, some annoying friends of my boyfriend came over for dinner. He thinks they're okay, but he's not subtle, so doesn't pick up on social cues. The girl is more annoying than the guy, but they're both condescending as fuck. So she walks in, sees my back scratcher, and squeals. I really don't have another word for it. Oh, someone got distracted doing the dishes. Better put this in its proper place. Dear reader, I was planning to give them spaghetti and meatballs. What happened next was satisfying as fuck. We sit down, and because I haven't replaced my back scratcher yet, I was serving spaghetti with a large fork. The girl sighs dramatically, gets up and takes my back scratcher from the drawer and starts serving everybody spaghetti. I refuse and use a fork, also for my boyfriend. She keeps sighing and finally asks, "Why are you so adamant on doing things your way, even to the point that you can't accept me serving spaghetti the normal way?" Keeping dumb, I ask to explain what the normal way to serve pasta is. She sighs, rolls her eyes, and waves my back scratcher in front of my eyes and says, "Like you don't know how to use this." I said, "I use that as a back scratcher because it's broken. That's why it was besides the couch." She starts laughing it off until my husband says, Yeah, that is what she uses it for. Be passive-aggressive in my house at your own risk. Honestly, bro, that fucking sucks. They probably thought they were being kinda helpful, despite their condescending nature. It was like, oh, here's how you actually serve spaghetti. Here's my yeast-covered back scratcher that is probably covered in skin cells. Don't make assumptions in someone else's house. That's usually the best way to live through life. I know they said they clean it daily, but it was still by the couch, probably either touching the leather or the floor, God knows where. That was used with food. Ugh. That actually reminds me of a mildly traumatic story that I remember from when I was 12. I was visiting my grandma's house and they had a back scratcher. It was like a wooden one that you would actually use. So I was like using it for a bit. It's like, oh, this is pretty good. Set it down, enjoying watching some TV. Grandma walks in, sits down, watching TV too. A little bit later, she's like, "Oh, Bella, do you want your butt scratched?" And she grabs the fucking claw and just goes to town. All while doing the baby voice and talking to the dog with, "Oh, Bella, you love your butt scratcher, don't you?" Here I am just sitting there in complete horror, realizing what I had just done. And the sudden urge to take a long, scalding shower was suddenly the top priority of the night. Eclectic Eccentric 5-1. My teacher wouldn't let me use the bathroom during a test, so I peed on her carpet. The title makes me sound like some super cool rebel engaging in some sweet malicious compliance, No, in fact, I was a shy little beanpole struggling with undiagnosed ADHD and a bladder condition. In 7th grade, my English teacher had a rule that if you didn't bring back your book, you couldn't take bathroom breaks. Let's ignore that having access to the bathroom is a right and not a privilege, alright? I was always a forgetful child. I've lost pencils, stuffed animals, jackets, glasses, and much more from a very young age. At the time, I was also a kid who wet their pants in bed all the time. Neither of these issues were properly, still don't really know what the bladder thing is at 28 years old, addressed or diagnosed until I was in my 20s. Needless to say, I did not do a great job of bringing my book in. During a test, I had the strong urge to go to the bathroom. At that point in time, my urges were accompanied by a leak that made it through to my pants and did not leave me a lot of time to hold it in. I walked over to her desk, keeping my skinny little thighs pressed together to hide the wet stain. When I asked to go to the bathroom, I was given a firm no. I was a kid that followed rules religiously and was uncomfortable speaking up against authority figures, so I waddled back to my seat and tried to finish my test. There was a lot of squirming, thigh squeezing, hand pressing, and grimacing, but none of it stopped the inevitable. Not only did I massively wet my pants, but it filled the empty space of the plastic seat and dripped into a puddle that soaked into the carpet. I thank whatever deity is out there that there wasn't tile. The people around me would definitely have been able to hear it happen, and I probably would have burst out into some very ugly crying. Holding back tears, I raised a trembling hand and had to whisper that I had an accident. Her attitude did a complete 180-degree backflip. She turned fumbling her words as she worked out a plan. I would hold on to my test at my desk and wait until the bell rang. The classroom would be empty for about 30 to 45 seconds between the English class walking out and her study hall kids walking in, so she could call my 8th period teacher and explain that I wouldn't be there. She would have the kid whose chair I drenched sit in a different seat, and I would be able to write it out until school was over. I sat through a silent study hall with a book planted in front of me while I battled the tears I wanted to cry. When it finally ended, she scurried off to my locker with my combination on a sticky note and came back with my gym clothes. She then stood guard outside the narrow window alongside the door while I changed. A janitor arrived before I left, so I had 2 people to shakily apologize to with very wet eyes. My mom told me that my teacher contacted her with some very emotional apologies and many promises to let me use the bathroom whenever I needed to. She apologized to me as well and generally was much kinder. She had previously been pretty cold because of the aforementioned forgetfulness. At the time, this didn't feel like a traumatize-them-back moment. I didn't start owning the issue I dealt with until my mid-20s, and now I actively embrace them. I'm very open with my partner about when I'm having particular symptoms and have advocated for myself medically to find solutions, admittedly only partial ones. It's horribly sad to think about how much I let embarrassment and shame dictate my life. It kept me from having sleepovers, made me miss field trips, and contributed significantly to my social anxiety. Looking back at this negative experience, however, makes me feel a little bit satisfied that the person who actually should be ashamed, i.e. the person who disregarded someone else's needs, was clearly traumatized to a degree, and I certainly don't let people make me feel ashamed of my limitations anymore. Now, we've covered previous bathroom stories with dealing with teachers not letting students go and that turning out horribly for them, including my own, but I actually found a comment down here that I thought would be really interesting to include because it gives some insight, and that allows me to segue into another point here. This comment was left in by a tattooed librarian. I'm going to get downvoted, but I get so tired of seeing this and all the "I would always let kids go to the bathroom. What kind of teacher tells a kid no? Try it. Be a teacher for a few days. We could always use subs." You go in thinking you would never, and after 5 minutes, you realize you absolutely would. Because older kids vandalize, cheat, do drugs, and wander the halls. Younger kids play around and wander the halls. Then, it's like dominoes. One kid asks to go, and then you spend all of your time monitoring who is in the bathroom. You get nothing else done besides that. And you are responsible for their safety. You learn who really needs to go and who wants to screw around. And you start saying no. Seriously, come on, try it. Come do the job. We would love to have compassionate people. Crowd management is no joke. I actually feel like this goes really well with the story that we just heard, because the teacher in question, they're definitely an empathetic person. They care deeply for their students. They had no idea what was going on, and in their eyes, they just saw a student who was, well, very forgetful and possibly, in their eyes, a slacker. It most certainly did not help that this was in the middle of the test and a student going to ask to use the bathroom in the middle of a test. I mean, I definitely can't blame the teacher's line of reasoning that they were hesitant to allow their student to go and use the bathroom. And it seems from how the story was told, they were extremely apologetic and understood that, oh, this isn't one of the problem students, and they learned it the hard way. And yeah, it definitely sucks that the student had to go through that and the teacher had to go through that. I really like the Tattooed Librarian's edition here because it helps give some insight that honestly I really wouldn't have thought of. The fact that they have to constantly monitor who has gone, who hasn't gone, the fact there's going to be chain reactions, and just everything else that's going to happen from one kid using the bathroom, especially during a test nonetheless. Hidden Jam, 1966. Road Rager decided to harass my sister. I don't know if I should post here, so you be the judge. So this happened eons ago. My sister just got her driver's license, and to celebrate, we, together with some friends and family, decided to take a day trip to the beach. There were a bunch of us, like 4 car load full of people. On the way there, all drivers were aware that my sister was a new driver, so everyone drove in accordance to the highway speed limit. My sister was at the back of the convoy, and every so often someone would check on my sister to make sure she didn't get lost or fall too far behind. Being a new driver, she drove on the rightmost side of the highway as a courtesy to people who are way faster than her. It was quite busy and it was a 2-lane highway. There were lots of cars on the road and everyone wanted to drive on the passing lane. She drove the speed limit. There's this huge gap between her and the next car in front. There was this asshole driver, let's call him Richard, who decided to harass my sister by tailgating her, eventually overtaking, cutting her off, and then brake checking her. When Richard had enough of making my sister's life miserable, he decided to go on his merry way. Cue our cousins. Car 1 was directly in front of Richard. Car 2 matched Richard's speed beside him. My sister slowed down enough to let Car 3 get behind Richard, eventually boxing Richard in. They then proceeded to drive at a speed slightly slower than the speed limit, driving Richard into a fit of apoplexy. We did this for a full 1 or 2 minutes, driving Richard up the wall, full-on driving while honking his horn while everyone laughed like crazy. He eventually merged into the shoulder and proceeded to stop. We, on the other hand, decided it wasn't worth our time to pursue. Ah, good times. Well, this is fun and will probably make them think twice in the future. Don't do this. This is a really good way to end up getting someone injured or killed. And I am being a bit of a buzzkill here, I know that, but road rage can lead people to do some really crazy shit. And if you roll the dice improperly and it turns out the one person who has road rage that you're fucking with has a gun, it could go really badly. So please, if you notice that someone has road rage but it's not directed towards you, just slow down and let them get as far away from you as possible. But if it is directed towards you, go to a public place as quick as possible, like a gas station or just somewhere where there's like a lot of people. Or a police station. That's actually a pretty easy one to do, is just go to a police station if someone's following you and they have road rage. That usually knocks it off pretty quick. I know I'm being a killjoy here, but it could save your life. One-eyed win. I'm not trying to cheat. I lost my eye. So I was 19 when I had my left eye removed. It was my senior year of high school and I had to take the SAT. When they removed my eye, they replaced it with a small orbital implant, over which my prosthesis would fit once all the tissue healed, which took about 8 weeks. Pirates of the Caribbean had just come out, so there was no way in hell I was wearing an eye patch. I just wanted to be a cute, regular girl in my senior year, so it was sunglasses for me. When I arrived at the place to take my SAT, they told me I could not wear my sunglasses and that it was an accommodation that I should have applied for months before my surgery actually happened. Mind you, these were your grandma's post-surgery sunglasses, not aviators or anything even remotely fashionable. So I flipped my sunglasses up, flashed my empty eye socket at the lady, and told her that I didn't know I'd be getting my eye removed before the deadline. She got quiet and then called into College Board or whatever to ask for a special accommodation, which I was granted. Only now I was crying and didn't even want to take the stupid test. Wasn't my best score, but I took the exam. God, I hate College Board so goddamn much. Their stupid little acorn logo. Whole thing's a goddamn scam. They've literally monopolized college admissions. It's just, ugh. Originally, I had this massive rant and tangent about how College Board is a 501c3 nonprofit, yet they nickel and dime all their test takers to the point where it's pretty ridiculous, and I've heard stories of people spending almost $600 just to take this stupid test. But I cut that out. For you guys, apparently. I have no idea if you guys like the rants or tangents or not. It's hard to tell, honestly. SRMG 925. My husband is digging his grave right now. Matched energy. Content warning: pet death. Yesterday afternoon, my elderly lab passed away in his sleep. It wasn't entirely a surprise, but we thought we'd have a few more days. He was in his comfy bed and, as is common, had released his bowels upon passing. Being a holiday, our only option was to bury him in our yard. We wrapped him up in a blanket and my husband started digging. I went to put his soiled bed in the trash, which is behind a bush on the north side of the house. My neighbor, on that side, doesn't live in the house. He just bought it as an investment property and has been slowly renovating it and tends to be around on weekends and holidays. He's an unpleasant old goat, and I'll just leave it at that. He saw me putting it in the trash and said, "Don't you teach those dogs," we have 3, "not to shit in the house?" I said, "Well, my husband is digging his grave right now, so we'll just have to let it slide." He immediately apologized, but not what I needed to hear at the time. I am not gonna lie, when I first read this story and read the title, I thought she told the neighbor the husband was digging his own grave, and she was telling the neighbor that she was about to pit-style execute her husband. I was like, yeah, that'll do it. Then I realized, no, she just meant that her husband is digging the grave of the dog that passed away. I had to re-record it. Oh, wow. what a different turn of events. Oh, but on the real side of it, that is a very sad story. And as someone who has had their dog pass away in the same room as them and having to deal with both the heartbreaking moment of realizing what's happening as well as having to clean up the mess, it is definitely something where you are not in the headspace to deal with that kind of shit. And yeah, I'm incredibly sorry for your loss, and I definitely understand how rough that can be. It sneaks up on you, and you never actually know how much time you have left, because I distinctly remember that same day, Bella was out there just playing rough and being a good dog and having a good time, and they curled up next to me while I was watching Dexter and passed away, and it was fuck, man. Flare fighters. It was bound to happen with how poorly you treated him. Trigger warnings for deliberate animal death and suicide attempts. My biological mother and I were never really close. I'll even state that she never really loved me because, honestly, my life would have been worse if she did. This was far from the first thing that made me want to go no contact, but I was 10 and literally unable to at the time, no matter how much I begged the courts to let me stay with my dad. I don't love much. She pretty much made it hard to love anything because if she noticed I did, she'd do her best to remove any good meaning I could have had from it. From clothes, to TV shows, to toys, and even highly sentimental gifts from deceased family members were ripped away from me because she threw them out or took away everything I had to still view them. When I was 10, me and my brother got goldfish. I think they were a gift from my dad's company, but my dad had cats and was worried about them killing our fish. So, after a talk with our biological mother, she allowed us to take them to her house. Unfortunately, my brother's fish died early on, a mix of stress and my brother not caring about them. But mine were living, and I had even named them, but mysteriously, my fish were dying. Flounder had gone first, then Seb, until Stripe was the only one left. I had cried a lot for them, and had become highly protective of Stripe. I had moved him to my room, I cleaned his tank every day, I changed his water as often as I was suggested to, I even noted down how much food he'd been eating in a day. I had finally convinced myself that Stripe couldn't mysteriously die if I wasn't around, and I finally left him alone for a bit to play with my siblings. I thought everything would be fine, but then I heard my bio mother shout about how unclean the tank was. I was angry because I had cleaned the tank that morning, and walked over to see my bio mother grabbing his tank. I asked her what she was doing, and she just responded, "Cleaning this out since you can't seem to be able to." It had taken me a moment to figure out what she meant by that, but she had a pot of boiling water on the stove and a cup of steaming warm water on the counter. By the time I realized what she was planning, it was too late. She'd grabbed Stripe from his tank and dropped him into the cut of steaming water, and started to dump out his tank. I was screaming, crying, and doing whatever I could to stop him from dying, but between the hot water and sudden drop, there wasn't anything I could have done. I had held him for a long while, just silently crying while my biological mother was acting like it was unavoidable. I remember her telling me, "It was bound to happen with how poorly you treated him." She finally got fed up with my lack of responses and flushed him down the toilet. I hated her for it. I hated her so much. It was 100% avoidable, and I eventually learned she'd been the one killing my fish the entire time. But the entire time she acted like I was in the wrong, like it was my fault I felt that way. My dad didn't understand, and nobody else cared about a fish. Some even offered replacement fish, which I'd turned down. I'll also admit that I had been suicidal for a while. I had tried killing myself by drowning on purpose when I was 9, and this had been one of the last straws I could have handled. I wrote a note, one specifically for my biological mother. I don't remember what I'd written, but I do remember that single phrase she loved to repeat about Stripe. It was bound to happen with how poorly you treated him. I can't recall how many times I'd written it down. I can't even mention how many notes I'd written, or which one I eventually put on the bathroom sink, where I'd intended to die at 11. I didn't die, but only because I didn't want my siblings to be the ones to find my body. I had no clue what to do, just knowing I didn't want to die where they could see. I handed the note to my older sister and just started walking. My uncle had eventually found me and dragged me back home, but I had just been so numb. I eventually found out that she kept the notes. Yeah, all of the notes. Years later, she asked me about them in the repeating phrase, demanding an answer that would make her look better in front of her friends. She hadn't expected me to respond the same way I always would. After you killed my pet and told me it was bound to happen with how poorly I treat him, it stuck with me just how poorly you treated me. Fuck, man, that one actually got to me. The only thing that I can really say is that I hope that OP's managed to actually get some distance between him and his mother, because this is rough. I know that some of you might just see this as, oh, it's just a fish, but this was their probably first connection with a pet, one they actually cared for, one they were willing to put themselves through a daily routine of excessive cleaning to ensure that their fish was happy, safe, and healthy. That's a lot of time and effort to go into a fish. They most certainly cared for it. And for it just to be tossed out by their mother like this, their biological mother like this, is fucked up. Do what you can to go no contact, even more than you already are, and good luck, man. And please stay safe. Liverlux0206. Roommate said I had an easy life and clearly never had traumatic experiences after shitting herself. This happened a few years ago when I was a sophomore in college and had just moved into an apartment complex that was in close proximity to said college. I was pretty naive and a pushover, so I would literally bend over backwards to this one horrendous roommate I had. She was a walking biohazard and a poster child for a victim complex. I could go on and on about the shit she pulled, but that's not the point. Pretty soon, living together, there were 4 roommates in total, were having issues as she would not clean up after herself, leaving dishes and food uncovered out for days, wouldn't clean her cat litter, etc. We tried to have roommate chats, but it would end up with her crying and saying she's struggling mentally so she cannot pull her weight, and us leaving the convo unsatisfied. It came to a boiling point when she had too much weed one night and had explosive diarrhea in the kitchen. It was everywhere. She would walk around with no pants or underwear, with only a hoodie to barely cover her nether regions, which is why the area of damage was so large. She refused to clean it, claimed she was not in a mentally stable place to do so, as seeing the mess triggered her and we should just be fucking considerate. The other 2 roommates and I got around to cleaning that abomination, and I sat the culprit down for a chat. The other 2 were done with her and refused to work out anything anymore, so it was just her and me. The conversation was unproductive. It was mostly her crying, calling us all sorts of names, and stating that she had PTSD, etc., etc. She finally said, "You can't relate because you have led an easy life. I mean, if your biggest problem is the house not being clean, then you just don't have that many issues." This was the breaking point for me, and snapped back with, just because I don't cry about the fucking issues I have when someone asks me to clean up after myself, doesn't mean my life is perfect. I lost my sister to cancer 3 years ago, and you don't hear me using her as an excuse to get out of cleaning my shit stains. The look on her face almost made the labor of scrubbing feces and bleach mixture off the floor worth it. A couple of other stuff happened after that, but her mental health excuses didn't hold as much weight anymore, and we all moved out pretty soon afterwards. What I said about my sister is true. My family and I have processed our grief, but it took a long time, and there were many fights, tears shed, etc. My parents ended up getting a divorce, but all is well now, and I look back on this incident and laugh at the absurdity of it. Yeah, this is just absolutely foul. Someone who doesn't clean up after themselves, is an active walking biohazard, doesn't wear pants, literally, God, the mess in general. I'm like actually getting ill thinking about it. Now look, it's one thing to be depressed and live in your own mess, but it's an entirely other thing to be depressed and subject other people to your mess and then expect them to clean up after you. That is foul. Consideration hot, 9518. I got called a puta by a customer. So as a heads up, I haven't taken Spanish in like 8 years, and my skin is subject to moonburn. So this is probably going to be ungodly painful to any person who speaks Spanish fluently. You have been warned. I had a customer who was livid that I couldn't give him a refund on some building supplies. Only the customer service desk could do that. He was on his phone and called me a puta. I smiled sweetly and replied, "Lo siento. Solo soy una puta por mi esposo y soy puta sucia." And I believe I just said, "Sorry, I'm only a whore for my husband. And I am a dirty whore." I think puta can mean bitch and another word that starts with an S and ends with a T. But I might be wrong. My Spanish swear words only went so far in high school. And it doesn't make sense for her to say I'm only a bitch for my husband. Quite the dirty bitch. So, maybe that works. Anyways, he shut up and went to customer service where he tried the same shit with a Puerto Rican associate. She gave him a blistering tongue lashing. And we laughed and laughed and laughed. Spanish speakers, how badly did I do? I am very curious. Hey, welcome to the outro. Don't forget this whole thing is basically brought to you by GamerSupps. If you like caffeine, then I can't recommend GamerSupps enough. Use code OZ at checkout to support the channel. And I do actually use this product. It's replaced all other sources of caffeine for me because I feel good. It doesn't have any of that extra stuff that a pre-workout blend might have. It's with a couple of the extra things to make it so you don't crash as hard. It's good. I like it. Personally, if you really want a good flavor, try the Soda Pressing Pear or even the Dragon Fruit Punch. Those two are my personal favorites right now.